Welcome to Faith and Science. I'm Dr. John Ashton. When I was a child, one of the animals that I found really scary was the gorilla. And of course, some of the gorillas are, sort of a large, hairy animal. And of course, they can have quite large teeth too, those big incisor teeth. Particularly at the front when they're showing their teeth, can look quite nasty. But just some time ago, I read a very interesting story about gorillas. It was in a book on true animal stories about amazing behaviour of animals. And this account was about an animal collector. I'm not sure what you would call them actually, but this particular person, Mr. Auberjonois was his name, was collected animals in Africa for the Hamburg Zoo back in the late 1920s, early 1930s. And he, of course, was working with his team in Africa, and he tells the story that one day he went out with his rifle to hunt for some game animals for food for his team of workers that were helping him to trap and cage the animals to take them back to the Hamburg Zoo. And he was walking along this jungle trail where he saw a large male gorilla ahead of him, and the gorilla was standing upright on his legs and standing up straight. So he's standing quite high, and Mr. Auberjonois knew that in that position that was a very defensive attack sort of type position for a gorilla. So he raised his rifle immediately in sort of defence, and this animal then began to lunge towards him. And as the animal got closer, he had to make the decision, do I kill this animal? And he was an animal lover himself, and he really appreciated animals. And as the gorilla got closer and he could see the gorilla was about to grab him, he actually put his rifle down and let the gorilla hug him. And the gorilla did. The gorilla gave him a big hug. And he thought to himself, as he was seeing all these processes were going through his mind, and I thought, boy, he's a very brave man to do that, because the gorilla could easily kill him. Some of the gorillas, particularly the West African gorilla, and I'm not sure which part of Africa Mr. Auberjonois was collecting his gorillas from, but some of those gorillas, they weigh 200 kilos. And they're very broad shoulders. They are immensely strong animals, extremely strong animals, and could have easily just crushed Mr. Auberjonois. And so he made this very interesting decision, and the gorilla then let him go and seemed to be signalling him to follow him. And so he followed the gorilla, and the gorilla led him through the jungle to a hut. And in this hut, out in the jungle, an old man was lying just on some grass in the hut, which was his bed. And the man spoke to Mr. Auberjonois, who's an African man, and he explained that the gorilla, he had actually rescued the gorilla as a little baby that had been left by poachers that had killed the mother, because back at those times they used to take the face and the hands, kill the gorillas for their faces and hands. And so this African man had saved the little baby gorilla and raised it up. And in essence, this little baby gorilla thought he was a human. And he would carry, the old man explained, he would carry firewood for him, help him carry firewood and help him carry buckets of water. But Mr. Auberjonois realised that the old man was very ill, and so he invited him to come with him back to his camp where they could get help. And in the meantime, Mr. Obajonan found that he could get the gorilla to do things such as carry water and these sort of things. There are some quite humorous things that occurred one day. The gorilla saw Mr. Obajonan having a wash, and of course out there he just had a bit of a tub of water, and he just got Mr. Obajonan just used the soap and lathered it over himself and then just sort of rinsed himself with some water. And the gorilla saw him doing this and raced over and grabbed the soap. But what the gorilla did was he actually put the soap in his mouth and swallowed it and then began rubbing his chest like he'd seen Mr. Obajonan do, but it didn't go all white and frothy, and so the gorilla started getting angry. So Mr. Obajonan had to race and find another cake of soap and bring it over and dip it in the water and show him, hang on, you don't eat the soap, you rub it on the outside. Another time, Mr. Obajonan had the habit of smoking a cigar, and he found that the gorilla actually had learnt to copy him and had learnt where Mr. Obajonan kept his cigars and the lighter, and would actually go and steal the cigars and go away and hide like a naughty schoolboy and smoke the cigars down behind a tree. And he noticed his cigar box was going down, and so he tells the story how he emptied the powder out of some bullets and carefully slit the cigar and put the material inside the cigar, and then carefully sealed it up. And he left the box out with only like the 2 cigars in, both of which had been tampered with in this way. And he said it wasn't long before later that day I heard an explosion down the bush, and the gorilla came racing back, and that cured him from smoking. But the other interesting tale was story was that he realised that they now had completed their consignment of wild animals, and they were about to be shipped back to Germany. And he realised that the gorilla couldn't be left back in the wild. It was so used to sort of being with humans that it probably wouldn't survive well in the jungle. So he decided to put it in a cage and take it back to Germany. Now, the gorilla wasn't very happy, but he trusted Mr. Obajonan. And in the meantime, I should mention too that the older African man had actually died. And that was another reason Mr. Obajonan decided to take the gorilla back to Germany. They had quite a few adventures, but he put the gorilla was placed in the Hamburg Zoo. But of course he wasn't, and Mr. Obajonan went back to doing his work, back to Africa actually. And the gorilla, of course, wasn't used to being kept in the cage like that, and he became very despondent. And the zookeepers, again, because the animal wasn't behaving himself and they were a bit afraid of it, weren't treating it very nice. And so it was becoming more and more aggressive, and to the point where the director of the zoo sent a telegram to Mr. Obajonan saying that if you don't come and get your gorilla, we will put it down. And Mr. Obajonan caught the first boat back to Germany, and he went into the zoo. But what he decided to do was to see what the gorilla's behaviour was. And when he went into the zoo, he saw this older lady visiting or standing outside the gorilla's cage and talking to the gorilla, and the gorilla was inside the cage. And later, as the lady moved away, he walked up to the lady and said, I saw you spend quite a bit of time there at the gorilla's cage. Are you interested in gorillas? And she said, well, there's something about this gorilla. She said, I really relate to him, and he it seems wrong that he's in that cage. there's something wrong going on. And Mr. Auberjonois said to this lady, he said, would you like to have that lady as that gorilla as a pet, or take him home? And she said, well, actually, I would. And I thought, well, wow, that's a pretty brave lady to do that. But so Mr. Auberjonois actually went round into the back where you know people aren't supposed to go, and was opening and decided to let the gorilla out. And of course, some zoo wardens saw him there and raced to try and stop him. But he got into the back door and got the gorilla out very quickly. And of course, they were running to get guns and everything to deal with the situation. But as soon as the gorilla saw Mr. Auberjonois, he raced over to him, gave him a big hug, and walked out holding Mr. Auberjonois' hand. And a huge crowd formed. And Mr. Auberjonois told the wardens now they'd got guns and they just put them down. It's all right. Just relax. He's okay. And in the crowd, the gorilla saw the lady, and he let go of Mr. Auberjonois' hand. He raced over and gave the lady a hug as well. And Mr. Auberjonois went to them and said, well, you can take him home. And it's interesting that gorilla then lived with that lady in her home in Germany for another 20 years. And this reminded me of a couple of things. One of the things it's interesting that when gorillas were first kept in captivity, people didn't understand their diets, and they used to feed them a lot of fruit and high carbohydrate biscuits. And when they did that, it actually gave them heart problems, and they had a lot of problems with the gorillas developing heart conditions in zoos till they realised that the gorillas themselves needed a high fibre diet. And the gorillas eat a lot of fibre. They eat a lot of plant material. They're essentially vegetarians, although occasionally they eat some ants and termites. But other than that, yes, they're essentially vegetarian. So they're mainly ferocious to protect their family. They have very strong families, generally a male with several females, and the baby gorillas are very heavily protected. As a matter of fact, there's been many instances of where poachers have tried to take baby gorillas away, and the adult gorillas will fight to the death and the whole family members will to try and save the little baby. And one of the things that fascinated me as I read this book on true animal stories was that the relationships that people can have with animals that reminded me back in the Garden of Eden, that many of the that relationship that people could have with animals, and that in many ways we get a lot of friendship from animals. Gorillas in particular are quite interesting animals, and of course there's I think a film was made and some documentaries made about a lady that went and lived with some of the mountain gorillas, which are a slightly different species of gorilla. Lived with them for some time. And so gorillas, of course, were actually first reported. The first scientific description of gorillas was back in 1847, and it was a missionary by the name of Thomas Savage, and he published an article. It was called Communication, describing the external characteristics and habitats of a new species, T. gorilla, which was Proceedings of the Boston Society of Natural History, Volume 2, in 1847. And he wrote, "This animal is known to the natives under the name of Angina and is much larger and more ferocious than the chimpanzee. Its height is above 5 feet, but it is remarkable for disproportionate breadth of its shoulders, which is double that of a chimpanzee. The hair is coarse and black except in old individuals when it becomes grey. They live in herds, the females exceeding the males in number. They are exceedingly ferocious and objects of terror to the natives who seldom encounter them except on the defensive. The killing of an ingena is considered an act of great skill and courage and brings to the victor significant honour. So that was, again, written. Now, it's very interesting, of course, that this discovery of the gorillas and so forth when in 1847 was just before the time of Darwin published in 1859 his Origin of the Species. And the fascination with this newly discovered animal, and of course earlier on, some of the very old descriptors, such as the first European zoologist to see a living gorilla was Paul du Chaillu, a zoologist who travelled through West Africa about 10 years later. And he was the first person to see actually a gorilla and give an actual description of him. And so again, that was just before Darwin's published his theory of evolution in 1859. And but there was a much earlier sighting reported by a Carthaginian, Hanno the Navigator, who lived in around the 500 AD time, and he explored the West African coast as far down as Sierra Leone, and he wrote that it's in the innermost recess was an island similar to that formerly described, which contained in like manner a lake with another island inhabited by a rude description of people. And that was, our interpreters called them gorillae. And so that's in actual fact where the term came from. So there's the fact that these were earlier on thought of being sort of like a race of people helped, I think, form in the mind this whole concept later on that humans evolved from apes, from these ape-like creatures. But of course, gorillas are very different to us. They have quite different DNA. I mean, there's a lot of DNA that is common. We have, because they have a similar digestive system. They have similar hormones, and these sort of things. Although they have a much larger digestive system, much longer digestive system, so that enables them to eat much coarser, plant fibre foods. But these animals, of course, have a different brain. While that gorilla that had been raised by that African man could do a number of different chores and could be communicated with, and indeed they've done experiments with gorillas and certain gorillas in there was a famous gorilla, Coco, who was taught American Sign Language, and so she could sign that she was hungry, but she couldn't construct a sentence, "I would like to have some food." So there's a very difference in the brain in this capacity. So the brains of these animals can't sort of comprehend tense and language as we see it in our language and can construct more complex understanding of things. So that's one of the big differences between these sort of animals. But we know many animals, of course, can develop relationships with humans. The most famous and perhaps the most popular ones are with horses and dogs, and of course, and other common pets like cats. And we often hear stories about animals rescuing people. Matter of fact, my mother used to tell the story about how her youngest brother, Jimmy, was rescued by their collie dog from drowning in a dam. He got into trouble swimming, and the collie dog was there and saw him in trouble and raced out and pulled him in by his shirt, sort of thing. So these are amazing things, and they, to me, they remind me of Eden and the fact that God made animals, I believe, in many ways to, have a big relationship with us. We have a problem with rabbits eating food in our garden at the moment, but I think these lovely little animals really, in many ways, they mow the lawn for us, and we have these mechanical lawn mowers and this sort of thing. Well, just imagine in Eden, when you could talk to the animals, you can say, well, look, please don't eat the tops out of the radishes. Can you just, eat the grass over there and trim it up to the edge there? That would be, so cool. But one of the other things that comes out with is with the gorillas in particular is being vegetarian. Of course, they're a very big, strong animal, and this again, quite clearly shows that vegetarians, you don't have to eat a lot of meat to be strong. But at the present time too, we're making this particular talk where Australia is dealing with the coronavirus, and it's interesting the source of the virus in humans seems to have been traced back to humans eating particular meat foods, particularly foods that the Bible would call unclean foods. In other words, they were foods that humans were not to eat. When we look in Leviticus chapter 11 of the Bible, it lists the foods that God saw after the flood, the non-plant-based foods that man could eat. So we think of the original diet in Eden was a plant-based diet. And initially it was fruits and seeds, and then after the fall, vegetables were included as well. And then it was only after the flood that man was permitted to eat meat, but not meat with the blood in it. He was not to eat the bloody meat. And then later on, of course, man was advised to cut the fat off as well. But and of the meat or animals that humans could eat, there were only certain animals and fish and so forth and birds that man could eat. So the animals had to have cloven hoof and chew the cud, so definitely plant-based animals. The fish had to have fins and scales and so forth. And so fish that don't have fins and scales, they were not to be eaten. And we find there's a whole lot of science behind that. I saw a lecture once by a doctor that pointed out that humans don't seem to get the virus diseases from the animals that the God saw clean, whereas the viruses that the humans can get from them are not easily transmitted from human to human. But the viruses that are picked up from the unclean animals are more readily transferred from humans to humans. And, I actually haven't tracked down the scientific studies on that, but that was a medical doctor that was making that claim. But I think there's powerful evidence, as we can see, if people actually in the world had been following the dietary guidelines of the Bible, it's highly unlikely that we would have the coronavirus epidemic. And the other fascinating thing, of course, is the hygiene rules in the Bible, for example, with regard to mould. If a house had mould in it, it was to be clean, went through a clean thing, and if that didn't stop the mould, then the house was to be burnt, destroyed, pulled down. And it's interesting, of course, in certain countries, and particularly in New Zealand, they can have quite serious mould problems, and people die from these mould problems. Of course, also there's the famous story of, up until the late 1800s, many surgeons, doctors didn't wash their hands in between patients, and there was tremendous transmission of disease and death in hospitals. And after, one quite famous doctor, I've just forgotten his name off the top of my head now, began to insist on washing hands, and he was laughed at to the point that it just about it may have even driven him to depression. So I recall the story because he knew it made a difference. When he washed his hands in his ward, it cut down the number of deaths. And when I think these things are based on these laws that God gave people, a lot of people, I know today many people don't know much about the Bible. I think the Bible is just some, ordinary book that's been put together with old myths and religious myths. But the Bible is God's word to man, that God has revealed to man through the minds of man. God has communicated there, and it has these laws that God gave to give humans health and to protect us. And I think we have so much evidence now, both from the dietary guidelines, the health, just the overall health benefits of vegetarian plant-based diets now are being widely recognised now, hugely widely recognised, and also how they can provide us with better health, with a better immune system. We have so much evidence now on the benefits of the plant-based diets that God intended for us to have originally. You've been listening to Faith and Science, and remember these programs are available on the internet if you Google 3abnaustralia.org.au and then click on the listen buttons. And remember to, if you listen to a program that you found particularly interesting or compelling, remember to share the link with your friends on social media so that they can learn about the evidence for our wonderful, loving Creator God. I'm Dr. John Ashton. Have a great day.
You've been listening to a production of 3ABN Australia Radio.